thank you particularly to Focus on Global South, because without the Shamali and Hamdi and the team and Randy, this gathering would not have taken place, and this conference would not have occurred. So I want to really acknowledge and thank their work and the efforts they have made to bring us together. Yes, and also the Sombath Initiative is now a small project that is under the umbrella of Focus on the Global South. Again, without the efforts of and commitment by the team, the Sombath Initiative would not even have been able to be launched. So again, I want to thank all of the team. Now, I've been asked to talk about Sombath Somporn, his philosophy and ideas on development. Hamdi also asked me to send him something prior to the conference, but I have not sent him anything. Partly is because I haven't really written anything down that I could really share with him. Part of the problem is because Sombath's ideas and philosophy is very wide-ranging, and even as his wife, it's a little bit difficult to try and summarize it. But in preparing to come and meet and speak with all of you, I put a few things together and reflected on his lifelong work. But I think one thing that has shaped Sombath's vision, his philosophy and his ideas, is like everybody else, like all of you who have worked here, and in your own struggle, in your own community. The ideas and philosophy have gone through a long evolutionary process of learning, reflecting, and practice. So it is not something that that you can kind of put together like a bottle, open it and then it will come out. I think also much of Sombath's ideas and philosophy have been shaped very much by his own childhood, how he lived, where he was born, the community that had shaped and given values to him as a child and growing up as a young boy. So I'll try and share with you a little bit and give you the context in which Sombath has lived and worked over the past 30 years, and maybe come up finally to how he has summarized it more or less in the last 5 to 8 years before he was disappeared more than 3 years ago. Unfortunately, a lot of Sombath's thinking hasn't been put down on paper yet. He was going to do that, but his disappearance has shortcut this process. I'm struggling with trying to put together what he has done, how he thinks, and what he wants together, but it has not been easy because Sombath, like many practitioners, are too busy working in the field rather than writing up things. And so there are bits and pieces here and there. But first, let me quickly share with you his life and his work, and how each phase has helped to shape his philosophy and his ideas. To understand what shaped Sombath, to become who he is, we really have to start with his childhood and his family background. Sombath is like most Lao, born in the village and raised in a very poor family. He was the first son of a family of 8, and his parents were very poor. So growing up poor has not been easy, and as the eldest, his responsibility was even greater. So he had to do everything, not only helping on the farm, but also helping to raise his other siblings with his mother. I think his being so close as the firstborn, unlike other Lao family, if the firstborn is a daughter, then all the domestic chores and the child care and raising goes to the daughter. But as a son and as the eldest, there's got no other sister to depend on. And he was the one having to do everything. So this is one of the reasons that also shaped Sombath later in life. He doesn't have very strong gender roles of what is a man or what is a woman. It really helps shape him and help him to understand, as a result, the burden that Lao women bear, because he lived it too, right? He helped his mother. He understood what it is to be able to be a woman in the family, and I think that helped him to shape his ideas about gender relations, which is quite rare in the Lao context. The Lao gender perspective is very much male dominant. If you are raised male, you are there, and you can, and that's why there's also a lot of violence in the family. And growing up this way helped him to understand, and he tried to apply it later in life to teach and to train other Lao people that it's important to respect the role of women. And he did a lot of work on empowerment of women, partly because he saw that is an issue that needed to be addressed. But going back quickly, so he grew up as a farm boy, and he lived very close to nature. He lived in a very, very small community, and the entire family, the entire community was so dependent on nature, and that helped Sombath to learn very early in life that their well-being really depended on the natural environment, on the health of the natural environment. It provided for them for much of their food, for their daily necessities. And he learned how to respect and work with nature rather than against nature. This understanding of value of the natural environment would later help shape many of his ideas on how to promote sustainable development and ecological development. So I believe that his upbringing, living close to nature, living poor, very dependent on the natural environment for their food security and all the other material well-being of the family, this was a major idea that has stuck with him throughout his life. He knew that for most Lao people, their lives depended on the water, the forests, the fields, because they are the source of the people's livelihoods. And destruction of nature without full consideration of its impact on the rural communities would undermine people's livelihoods and security. Another aspect that has shaped Sombath's early years was that he grew up in a time of war. There was the civil war in Laos. You have the Pathet Lao, which is pro-Vietnam, fighting against the right-wing royalist Lao. They're fighting for part of the whole Vietnam War struggle. They are poor farmers. And he used to say, we don't know who is fighting who. We don't know why are they fighting. We only know we suffer every time the villagers from one side or the other come through the village, because they will take away our rice, or they will burn our houses, or take away our animals. They had no understanding of what the war was about. They were only the victims of that conflict. So this shaped his understanding about how important it is to have peace. He used to say, in war, there are no winners, there are only losers. Because during part of the time when he was very young, he was only 9 years old, his family had to pack up their things and move to Thailand to escape the fighting. But their farm is on the Lao side. The rice is in the Lao side. So as a 9-year-old boy, he used to have to paddle across the Mekong River, go back to his village, and some people left there, and collect the rice and take back to his family. And he lived like this for a year. This had a major impact on his thinking. And this is the reason why Sombath also really abhor conflict, abhor war. And he used to say that we can always resolve our problems through negotiation, through building consensus and understanding across the different perspectives. We don't need to be so adamant in saying, I'm right, I'm right. There is always a means to share our differences and work out our differences, no matter how difficult it is. It is much better than getting into a situation of conflict. And this has also helped shape his work and the way he worked with other people. Of course, in life, as most of you probably have also experienced, you can't get everybody to agree with you. And you don't agree all the time with how people think. Sombath's way is always to reach out. Reach out. Even if there's people he does not like, groups he cannot agree with, he tries to reach out. And even though sometimes it doesn't mean that he's successful, but his ability to put aside his own ideas, his own thinking, always reach out to find a common ground, has made it possible for him later to really become respected by the different civil society groups, even government groups working in Laos. And he always said later also that because of the tension, especially increasingly between business groups and the community groups, generally over fighting over resources. There are many civil society groups or NGO groups who say, oh, all the business corporations are enemies. They are enemies, we cannot talk to them. He say, no, you have to talk to them. Because they are the ones who hold the power. They are the ones who hold the money. We are too small. They will crush us. We need to talk to them. We need to engage them. We need to win them over. You cannot win everyone over, but maybe you can win one or two of the businesses over. They will see why the communities need to do the work, why they need the land, why they need the forest, maybe you can work out some way to share out the resources that it will benefit to everybody. So this ability to build partnerships is, I think, one of his, not his strength, but one of his guiding principles in the way he worked. Sombath grew up poor. And in those days, in rural communities like that, many of the children, under those circumstances, would not have received an education. Because there are very few schools, in those rural communities. And parents generally do not value education because they need the labor of all their children to help out in the farm. Sombath was very fortunate in the sense that his father, who grew up illiterate and was denied an education, decided that that would not be the fate for his son. So it's Sombath's father who pushed Sombath to go to school. Initially, he was only 4 years old to study in the temple schools. There were no schools. And he pushed his son to study. And Sombath used to say, I had to get up at 4 a.m. He said, I would want to sleep. And his mother would cry because his father would really, pull the child up and say, go, study, go to school. And slowly he developed a love for education. And I think his opportunity to receive an education helped open his worldview, changed the way of his life, because he could very well have been continuing in a very poor rural village, struggling for his livelihood, spending his entire time finding enough food or growing enough rice just to feed the family, as still many, many Lao farmers do today. Not only did he finish high school in Laos, he also had an opportunity, just by chance, partly because of his own hard work, to win a scholarship to go to the United States. He first went to the United States when he was 17. It was an exchange program. He was, in that year, among 7 Lao people who went to the United States. He was sent to a very small community in Wisconsin to live with an American family. First time for a Lao boy out from a village into the U.S. He was lucky to live in a good family, and he talked about that 1 year of his life. He said he was, for the first time in his life, he was able to focus on his studies without having to do a multitude of chores that he would do normally as a farm boy. And his year living with an American family made him learn to appreciate the value of economic and financial security. But at the same time, he also gained a much greater appreciation for the simplicity of the village life, where he said, yes, American families, food was no problem. They had everything, good housing. They had facilities to enjoy themselves. But he said he always compared this with the community he lived in, the family he lived in. And he said that 1 year helped him to develop a greater appreciation of the simplicity of village life, where people were more caring and sharing, and they had a greater sense of family and community solidarity. So he was able to internalize within himself what are the positive features of a society which is rich and a society which is poor. What are the differences? And he said that even in the US, 1 year living there with this family, even though they were materially secure, you cannot put a cash value on family values, on love, on care, and community solidarity. And that remained with him. After spending 1 year in Wisconsin, he returned to Laos, and he was lucky to get another scholarship, and he was sent to study at the University of Hawaii. In those days, there were USAID fellowships. He was sent there to study education. He didn't want to study education. He wanted to study agriculture. He wanted to study something which he thought would be useful when he returned back to Laos and help his family. But it turned out that his study in education were later in life to allow him to understand how knowledge in education can also help him to have a better appreciation of how to use education in a way that can help his own people. He got his first degree in education. It was supposed to teach English, but I think it went beyond. A good education, a good university education actually gives you the basic grounding of finding information and make use of information. But after he finished his degree in education, that was the end of the war in 1975 in Laos. He could not go back. He wanted to go back, but he couldn't go back immediately because there were so much uncertainty back in Laos. So he continued his studies, and this time he studied agriculture. He studied agronomy. And he was really, that was around the time I met Sombath, and he was really excited. He said, now for the first time, I'm going to study about new ways of doing agriculture, and I can use this knowledge to go back and try and improve the agriculture development of Laos. But soon into his study, into about the second or third year of his study, he realized that modern agriculture is not suitable for Laos. He said that modern agriculture was too dependent on high investments of technology, machinery, fertilizers, pesticides, and they were meant for commercial agriculture. And reflecting on the farming communities that he grew up with and the majority of the farmers in Laos, he realized that the Lao farms were too small to have big investment in machinery, and there were farmers who were too poor. And Laos at that time was not a commercial agriculture country. The agriculture was more for self-sustenance. So he argued with his professor all the time, and say, what you're teaching is not suitable for many parts of the world, not only in Asia, but in Latin America, in India, South Asia, where our farming practices are different. Is there anything that you can offer? And all his professor would say was that, well, you go home if you want and see what you can apply and practice what you can apply, which is what he did. He finally returned home. It was after the war had ended, and Laos at that time was very, very poor. The war had destroyed the greater part of Laos. Many areas were bombed out. Many communities were abandoned. The farms were abandoned because they were refugees. And the government was very poor. More than 90% of the rural people had escaped as refugees, meaning they left. The people with the education left, the people with the capital left, with the resources, with the money left, and the Lao government was very, very poor. And it was a very, the Lao government is still a one-party communist government. And the war years had made the government very suspicious of the outside world, particularly the capitalist world. It considered Thailand as enemy number one because the planes were flying from Thailand to bomb Laos. So enemy number one was Thailand, the US, and all the capitalist countries around, and their friends were only Vietnam and China. And at that time, Vietnam was having a conflict with China, and so the only friend was Vietnam. And so the government was very suspicious of the outside world, including Sombath, who actually studied in the US. So Sombath was always considered an outsider. But he was determined to do whatever he can to see what he could contribute to his own community and society. So his first efforts were actually in improving food security through low-cost farming approaches. He went back and worked with his family. He looked at he always knew how the farmers were doing. But that was not enough. He decided he had to test many of the technologies that he thought may work first on his family farm. He introduced biofertilizers. He combined raising fish in the rice field, which many people in some parts of Laos were doing. And he used it, tested it before he tried with other communities. So for Sombath, it was always learning, doing, reflecting, and reapplying. His knowledge seldom came from theory. In fact, he said he gave up for a period. He was so disillusioned with learning from books, he won't read. He says, what's the point? I read all these books and I learn nothing. Because if I try and apply them, they don't work. So for him, it was practice before theory. It was always practice before theory. It was only later in life that he went back to consolidate his knowledge and began reading widely. For the first period of his life, between early 80s, for about 10 years, he says, no, books are not going to teach me. I have to go out and learn from the people, with the people, and practice what is most appropriate in our own culture, in our own community, in our own environment. And that period of his life, he experimented with what he later on called a rice-based integrated farming system, because most of the farmers are still dependent on growing rice. That is their main staple, and that is their main security. 2 minutes. I thought we have half.
Yes. So
okay.
We'll have to get some questions and answers.
Okay. He practiced and he learned, and he used the rice-based integrated farming system, where he said most farmers cannot depend only on rice, but they should have other crops. Like you can use rice and have the dry season, you can have other food crops, beans, squashes, melons, or whatever that grow in the local area, because then you do not depend. If one crop fails, you can always rely on the other crop. So that was the earlier part of his life, and he used it to test many technology. But working so closely with the community made him also realize that agriculture is only one sector or one part of a community life. There are many other community needs, including water, sanitation. There are gender issues to be addressed. There are issues of rural employment, challenges of developing rural enterprises, and so on. So later, he moved away from just agriculture work to integrated community development. And his approach has always been, listen to the people. Don't come with your preconceived ideas. So he pioneered in Laos. It was the first to pioneer a participatory rural appraisal. He read something about that, but he adapted it to what is suitable for Laos. And he developed a whole planning process working with the people to identify the areas that the communities needed and help them to come up with solutions themselves. If there was any funding support, it was very small. He said, look inside, don't look outside. Look inside. Don't expect donor money to come and save you. If you get a little bit of donor money, that's bonus. We have the resources, we help ourselves. Find out what we can do ourselves and if we can get external help, that's good. But getting external help should not be the priority, and which he did. And the manuals on participatory rural appraisal that he first developed and used in Laos were now adapted and adopted, revised, by many of the other NGOs who work with communities today. And he and many of them continue to use it, although without acknowledging that it ever came from Sombath. He also, because Laos also was evolving as a society and economy and had now greater links to the outside world, so it's becoming increasingly a cash-based economy rather than just a subsistence economy. It became very clear that he had to help the rural people to find income. And he started with the community, what are the appropriate rural enterprises that they can start. And his work has helped many communities start small rural enterprises, including things like producing water filters that they can use themselves but sell. Fuel saving stove. It's now sold all over Southeast Asia, but it started with him. Now FAO and ADB and many of the big donor agencies have put money and started and some of it call it the ADB stoves, which is all nonsense because ADB never do anything like that. So they had fuel saving stove. They also started rural enterprises for women on handcrafts. So the women can sell their handmade products, which they had traditionally used for their own use, but now become a commodity that they can sell and make some money for their children. So he also, with communities that grow a lot of bananas or fruit, he taught them very simple ways of drying their products, drying bananas, drying fruits, packaging them and selling them. And now they now have joined other enterprises and become one of the few exportable Lao product items, but it's linked up with another company. He starts an idea, and once it grows into a certain scale, they become on their own. The local businessmen take them off, so that he does not say, this is mine, it becomes theirs. But later on, by about the 2000, a little bit before them, he realized that he needed to work more on education. That is the key, as far as he's concerned, to change people's practices, especially the young people. So he developed a new component project, which became his flagship program on youth development. And by that time, he was able to set up his own organization. It's the first non-for-profit Lao organization called PADAC, which means Participatory Development Training Center. And through this center, he developed and trained many of the technologies that he had worked in the communities and started to train many, many young people. I know my time is up. I want to just say something else. Apart from this community-based work, working closely, concern for the environment, respect for the community, listening to the people, learning, always doing things which are only appropriate and with the people, he started to explore more on the spiritual aspect of development. Somebody is a Buddhist, raised as a Buddhist, but he never practiced very much. In other words, he doesn't spend a lot of time going to temples, going to all these festivals. But he explored the spiritual side of Buddhism. What are the basic values in Buddhism that should form the basis of his society and his work? He started at that time reading a lot of, he started reading again. And he read not only development literature, but he started to read a lot of work on Buddhism. the works of Thich Nhat Hanh, the very famous Vietnamese monk. He also read widely about Dalai Lama's work, and also a Thai Buddhist scholar here, Ajahn Sulak Sivaraksa, and studied deeply the whole concept of engaged Buddhism. In other words, how do you use Buddhism as a way to involve and use the value system into your own society and community? He started working with the Lao Sangha and got them to be linked up with Ajahn Sulak's organization so they get some training, new way of thinking of how to apply Buddhism in the lay society. And he pioneered a lot of work with the Buddhist Sangha on also bringing Buddhist values of compassion, loving kindness, respect for nature. Nature meaning everything in nature, not only the human world, the animal world, the plant world, the aquarian world. This is really using those Buddhist values and internalize them more and more into his work. And that was when he came up with the slogan which he used: education must start with education of the heart. Education of the heart is the heart of education. He was so disappointed with how mainstream education is doing. The teaching in schools is nothing but just rote learning, passing exams, and they say teach people nothing about real life. In some of his education projects, which he had worked with the Ministry of Education, he started to introduce what he called experiential learning, getting the kids out of this classroom, getting them to go into the communities, getting the people from the community into the school, getting the kids to do school gardening, to do recycling, to do earthworm raising. In other words, break open the school wall, break open the temple wall, that the temple, the monks should be in the community should be also in the school and in the temple, because those walls are artificial. The society comprises of people who can make sustainable livelihoods, people who are spiritually, who have spiritual values to guide them, right? And not to do harm to other people or to themselves or to the environment. It's all one. For him, it is one. And he consolidated this thinking later on in life into what he called a model of balanced development. And this is what it's all about. He called this is a house. He symbolized it as a house. To have a stable house, you have at the base good governance, rule of law, leaders who are honest, principled, and know how to lead and be a model of society, rule of law, good governance. There's a lot of talking in Laos now, good governance, rule of law, but they never practice it, right? So he said this has to be the base. To have this base strong, you must have quality education. Education that teaches you how to be a person, not how to read and write. But how do you get that? How do you get kids to learn, not just in school, but also outside of school, learn relevant education? They say for that, we need 4 pillars. Okay? Just like in the house, you need 4 pillars before the house can stand up. The first is the pillar of the economy. This is where he always say, sometimes many NGO workers ignore this. You know, we don't, or sometimes they even deny there's a need to make money. You see, you need money. You need money to be able to live. Sustainable sufficiency economy. Every society is based on its own culture and its value. Because cultural wisdom is indigenous knowledge, is all here in the pillar of culture. Environment. protect the environment. Your environment is the very basis of many people's livelihood, and that pillar here is spiritual. Your spiritual values, with stress on developing all the 4 pillars, your house will be stable. If you only develop the economy without the other pillars, your house will be not stable. Or if you only talk about spirituality without the other pillars, your house will not be stable also. You have to work across this, and the end is, what do you have? A happy and a livable life. This is Sombath's model of balanced development. This is what he was before he was disappeared, something he came out with, and which he had shared with many, many people. And it resonated with lots of people. People liked it. Young people in Laos liked it. Even the government liked it. They just don't know what to do with it. But I think that is the summary, the core of Sombath's philosophy and his ethics. So I thank you.